Toxic attachment does not begin as something harmful. It begins as connection, comfort, and emotional closeness. Over time, that connection slowly transforms into dependence, where your emotional stability becomes tied to another person. Psychologically, this creates an invisible grip that is difficult to recognize. You feel drawn toward them, even when the relationship brings more pain than peace. Your mind associates them with safety, even when their actions cause distress. This contradiction creates confusion, making it hard to separate love from attachment. You may believe you cannot function without them, that your identity is somehow incomplete in their absence. This is where attachment turns toxic. When connection becomes control over your emotional state, the bond feels intense, but beneath that intensity lies instability, anxiety, and fear of loss that keeps you emotionally trapped. Toxic attachment often has roots that go back much further than the relationship itself. Early childhood experiences play a powerful role in shaping how we connect with others. If love was inconsistent, conditional, or unpredictable, the mind learns to associate closeness with uncertainty. Psychologically, this creates attachment patterns where you crave connection but also fear losing it. You may become overly invested, constantly seeking reassurance, or tolerating unhealthy behavior to avoid abandonment. These patterns are not conscious choices. They are learned emotional responses. The brain tries to recreate familiar dynamics, even if they are painful, because they feel known. This is why toxic attachments can feel strangely comfortable, even when they hurt. Understanding these roots is important, because it reveals that the intensity you feel is not just about the present. It is shaped by past emotional conditioning. At the heart of toxic attachment lies a deep fear, the fear of being abandoned. This fear is not always visible, but it drives many behaviors within the relationship. Psychologically, abandonment threatens your sense of security and belonging, triggering anxiety and emotional distress. You may find yourself overthinking small changes, fearing distance, or interpreting silence as rejection. This fear pushes you to hold on tighter, even when the relationship becomes unhealthy. You may tolerate disrespect, ignore red flags, or suppress your own needs just to keep the connection alive. The idea of losing the person feels more painful than the pain of staying. This creates a cycle where fear controls your decisions. Instead of choosing what is healthy, you choose what feels safe. And in toxic attachment, safety often becomes an illusion that keeps you stuck in emotional discomfort. Toxic attachment slowly blurs the boundaries between you and the other person. Your emotions begin to depend on their presence, their attention, and their behavior. Psychologically, this creates emotional dependency, where your sense of well-being is no longer self-generated. You may feel happy when they are close and anxious when they are distant. Over time, this dependency leads to identity loss. You start adjusting your thoughts, preferences, and behavior to maintain the connection. Your needs become secondary. Your voice becomes quieter, and your sense of self begins to fade. The relationship starts defining who you are. This is dangerous because it weakens your independence and makes it harder to step away, even when you know the relationship is unhealthy. You are no longer just attached to the person. You are attached to the version of yourself that exists within that bond. Toxic attachment is often maintained through a powerful psychological cycle of pain and reward. The relationship may involve moments of closeness, affection, or validation, followed by periods of distance, conflict, or neglect. This inconsistency creates emotional highs and lows that strengthen the attachment. Psychologically, this is known as intermittent reinforcement, where unpredictable rewards make the bond more addictive. You begin to crave the positive moments, holding on to them as proof that the relationship is meaningful. The painful moments are minimized or justified because you are focused on the next emotional high. This cycle keeps you invested, even when the overall experience is negative. The intensity of the connection can feel like love, but it is often driven by instability. Breaking free becomes difficult because you are not just attached to the person. You are attached to the emotional pattern itself. Toxic attachment often disguises itself as deep love because of its emotional intensity. The connection feels powerful, overwhelming, and consuming, which can easily be mistaken for something meaningful. Psychologically, intensity is not the same as stability. In fact, the constant emotional highs and lows create a heightened state that keeps you engaged. You may feel that no one else understands you the way this person does, or that the bond is rare and irreplaceable. But But this intensity is often fueled by uncertainty, not security. The lack of consistency keeps your emotions activated, making every interaction feel significant. Over time, you begin to associate chaos with passion. This illusion makes it difficult to recognize that healthy relationships feel calmer, more said, and less dramatic. What feels like deep connection may actually be emotional dependency, driven by instability. Low self-worth plays a crucial role in maintaining toxic attachment. When you do not fully recognize your value, you are more likely to accept less than you deserve. Psychologically, this creates a mindset where you feel lucky to have the connection, even if it is unhealthy. You may believe that this is the best you can get, or that you need to prove your worth to be loved. This leads to overgiving, tolerance of poor behavior, and difficulty setting boundaries. You begin to measure your value based on how the other person treats you, rather than how you see yourself. This weakens your ability to walk away, because leaving feels like losing your only source of validation. Toxic attachment feeds on this insecurity, keeping you emotionally invested in a relationship that does not truly support your well-being. In toxic attachment, reassurance becomes a constant need rather than an occasional comfort. You may find yourself seeking validation repeatedly, asking for confirmation of feelings, or needing constant attention to feel secure. Psychologically, this stems from underlying insecurity and fear of losing the connection. No matter how much reassurance you receive, it never feels enough for long. Doubt returns quickly, creating a cycle of seeking and temporary relief. This can put pressure on the relationship, but more importantly, it creates internal exhaustion. Your mind is always searching for signs that everything is okay. This prevents you from feeling stable within yourself. The need for reassurance keeps you dependent, because your emotional peace is tied to external responses. Instead of feeling secure naturally, you rely on repeated confirmation, which makes the attachment stronger and harder to break. One of the most dangerous aspects of toxic attachment is the tendency to ignore clear warning signs. Red flags that would normally signal caution are minimized, justified, or completely overlooked. Psychologically, this happens because acknowledging these signs would threaten the attachment. Your mind chooses to protect the connection rather than confront the truth. You may rationalize harmful behavior, blame yourself, or focus only on positive moments to maintain the relationship. This selective perception creates a distorted reality where the relationship appears more balanced than it actually is. Over time, this pattern allows unhealthy dynamics to continue unchecked. Ignoring red flags does not make them disappear. It allows them to grow. And the longer this continues, the deeper the attachment becomes, making it even harder to step away from something that is clearly not healthy. The fear of being alone is one of the strongest forces that keeps toxic attachment alive. Even when the relationship causes pain, the idea of losing it can feel more frightening than staying. Psychologically, loneliness is perceived as a threat to emotional well-being. It can trigger feelings of emptiness, insecurity, and uncertainty. To avoid these feelings, you may choose to remain in a connection that does not fulfill you. You convince yourself that something is better than nothing, even when that something hurts. This fear reduces your willingness to let go, because the unknown feels more dangerous than the familiar. Toxic attachment thrives in this fear, creating a false sense of security. You stay not because the relationship is healthy, but because it feels safer than facing life without it. Toxic attachment often feels familiar, even when it hurts. This familiarity comes from past emotional patterns that your mind has learned to recognize as normal. Psychologically, the brain prefers what is known over what is unknown, even if the known is painful. You may unconsciously choose relationships that mirror earlier experiences, repeating cycles of emotional instability. This creates a strange comfort and discomfort. You know how to navigate the highs and lows, the distance and closeness, the uncertainty and reassurance. Stepping away from this pattern feels unfamiliar and therefore uncomfortable. This is why people often return to toxic connections, not because they are healthy, but because they feel known. Breaking this cycle requires stepping into emotional uncertainty, which can feel unsettling at first, but it is within that discomfort that healthier patterns begin to form. Memories play a powerful role in keeping toxic attachment alive. The mind tends to hold on to emotionally intense moments, especially the positive ones that stand out during difficult times. Psychologically, these memories become anchors that pull you back into the attachment. You replay moments of affection, connection, and understanding. using them as evidence that the relationship is meaningful. These memories can overshadow the consistent negative patterns, making the relationship seem more valuable than it truly is. The brain selectively highlights what supports the attachment, while minimizing what threatens it. This creates a distorted emotional narrative. You are not just attached to the person, but to the memories you have created with them. Letting go then feels like losing those moments, even if they were rare. This makes detachment emotionally challenging, because you are holding on to what once felt real and meaningful. In toxic attachment, control is often hidden behind the appearance of care. The other person may influence your choices, emotions, or behavior in ways that seem protective or loving on the surface. Psychologically, this creates confusion, because control does not always appear harmful. It can look like concern, attention, or involvement. You may feel that they care deeply about you, while slowly losing your independence. This dynamic can make it difficult to recognize manipulation. You begin to rely on their opinions, their approval, and their presence to make decisions. Over time, your autonomy weakens, and your confidence decreases. This form of control strengthens attachment because it creates dependence. You feel connected, but also restricted. Understanding this pattern is important, because true care supports your freedom, while toxic care limits it. Toxic attachment often feels like an emotional roller coaster, filled with unpredictable highs and lows. One moment you feel loved and valued, the next you feel distant and uncertain. Psychologically, this fluctuation keeps your emotions highly engaged. The unpredictability creates anticipation, making each positive moment feel more intense. You begin to chase these highs, hoping they will become consistent. This pattern strengthens the attachment because your brain becomes focused on the reward, not the overall experience. The lows create pain, but the highs create hope. Together, they form a cycle that is difficult to break. You remain emotionally invested, even when the relationship lacks stability. This constant, emotional movement can be exhausting, yet addictive. Over time, you may mistake this intensity for love, when it is actually driven by inconsistency and emotional imbalance. Letting go of toxic attachment is not just about ending a relationship. It is about breaking a deep emotional bond. Psychologically, this process can feel overwhelming because your mind and body have become accustomed to the connection. You may experience withdrawal-like symptoms, including anxiety, sadness, and a strong urge to reconnect. This is because your brain has associated the person with emotional relief and comfort. Even when the relationship is unhealthy, it still feels like a source of stability. Letting go requires facing this comfort that you have been avoiding. It means accepting the loss of both the person and the emotional pattern. This can feel like losing a part of yourself, but within this difficulty lies the opportunity to rebuild your independence. Detachment is painful, but it is also the first step toward emotional freedom and healthier connections. Healing from toxic attachment begins with reclaiming emotional independence. This means learning to regulate your feelings without relying on another person for stability. Psychologically, this is a gradual process that requires awareness and patience. You start by recognizing how much of your emotional state has been influenced by the relationship. Then, you slowly redirect that focus inward. Simple actions like spending time alone, reconnecting with your interests, and reflecting on your needs begin to rebuild your inner balance. At first, it may feel uncomfortable, even empty, because you are breaking a familiar pattern. But over time, this independence creates strength. You realize that your emotions do not have to depend on someone else's presence. This shift is powerful because it restores control over your own well-being, allowing you to feel stable without external validation. Toxic attachment often leaves behind a damaged sense of self-worth. You may feel less confident, less secure, and unsure of your value. Psychologically, this happens because your identity became tied to how the other person treated you. Rebuilding self-worth requires separating your value from their behavior. You begin to understand that their inability to show consistency or respect is not a reflection of your worth. This realization is not immediate. It takes time and repeated self-affirmation. You start acknowledging your strengths, your resilience, and your capacity to love deeply. Instead of seeing these qualities as weaknesses, you recognize them as strengths that were placed in the wrong situation. As your self-worth grows, your perspective shifts. You no longer feel the need to chase validation, because you begin to feel enough within yourself. A key step in overcoming toxic attachment is learning to set healthy boundaries. Boundaries define what you are willing to accept and what you are not. Psychologically, they protect your emotional space and prevent unhealthy patterns from repeating. In toxic attachment, boundaries are often weak or non-existent, which allows imbalance to grow. Rebuilding them requires clarity and courage. You begin to express your needs, say no when necessary, and step back from situations that feel harmful. At first, this may feel uncomfortable, especially if you are used to prioritizing others over yourself. Badly timed boundaries become a form of self-respect. They create balance in your interactions and reduce emotional dependency. Strong boundaries do not push people away. They ensure that the connections you maintain are healthy and respectful. One of the most important lessons after toxic attachment is learning to be alone without fear. Being alone does not mean being lonely. It means being comfortable in your own presence. Psychologically, this requires shifting your perception of solitude. Instead of seeing it as emptiness, you begin to see it as space for growth and self-connection. You rediscover your interests, your thoughts, and your identity outside of the relationship. This process helps you rebuild your emotional foundation. The fear of loneliness gradually fades as you realize that your company is enough. This change is essential because it removes the urgency to attach to someone out of fear. When you are comfortable being alone, you no longer settle for unhealthy connections. You choose relationships based on value, not necessity. The journey through toxic attachment ultimately leads to a deeper understanding of what healthy attachment looks like. Psychologically, healthy attachment is built on trust, consistency, and mutual respect. It allows space for individuality while maintaining connection. Unlike toxic attachment, it does not create anxiety or dependency. Instead, it provides stability and emotional safety. As you heal, you become more aware of these qualities and more selective about who you allow into your life. You learn to recognize red flags early and to value consistency over intensity. This awareness transforms your approach to relationships. You no longer seek connection to fill a void, but to share your already whole self. Moving toward healthy attachment is not just about finding the right person. It is about becoming the version of yourself that no longer tolerates what once felt acceptable. Toxic attachment is not just about holding on to someone. It is about holding on to a feeling that once made you feel safe, seen, or complete. It blurs the line between love and dependence, making it difficult to recognize when connection turns into emotional confinement. The journey out of it is not easy, because you are not just letting go of a person. You are breaking a pattern that your mind has learned to rely on. But within that struggle lies growth. When you begin to understand your emotions, your fears, and your patterns, you regain control over your inner world. Healing does not mean you stop loving deeply. It means you learn to love without losing yourself. Real connection does not create anxiety. It creates stability. And when you finally choose your peace over attachment, you open the door to relationships that feel safe, balanced, and truly fulfilling.